Month, the Conservative Political Action Conference welcomed explicit Nazis to their annual convention outside of Washington, D.C. Yes, that CPAC. Ushered into prominence by Ronald Reagan, that CPAC where Trump made his more or less official entry into national politics in 2011. That CPAC, which during the Trump years became instrumental in transforming the quote-unquote conservative movement into a fascist juggernaut. That CPAC where Trump made his first public appearance after the January 6th insurrection, a triumphant return to his hardened base of support. This year, CPAC was a little different for a number of reasons, even as more seats sat empty, even as the halls lacked some of the shine of past years. The conference brought in and embraced fascists from around the world, from Bolsonaro Jr., Hungary's ambassador to the U.S., and one of many prime ministers of Great Britain, to the current leaders of Argentina and El Salvador alongside their keynote speaker, Donald Trump. We spoke with Amanda Moore, who was there, who got kicked out, who exposed the gleeful embrace between neo-Nazis and the mainstream of Republic-fascist politics. Here is that conversation. So last week I shared a little bit about how CPAC kicked off with Pizzagate conspiracist Jack Posobiec, kicking it off with democracy, we're here to overthrow it completely, and Trump promising to be the crowd's retribution. But I left out a lot of things. I did leave out Stephen Miller calling for the border to be sealed, to deport all illegals, to establish large-scale staging grounds for removal flights, deputizing the National Guard, and deploying military to the southern border. And very importantly, that there were explicit neo-Nazis that were welcomed at what some call the most mainstream establishment conservative conference. It's truly no surprise that a crowd who gives straight up Hitlerian speeches a standing ovation has open Nazis in the crowd. But there's more to unpack there. So to discuss that, I am so glad to be joined by Amanda Moore, whose critical journalism exposed the overt Nazi presence at CPAC this year. While the Nazis were welcomed, she was actually kicked out of the conference. I'm really glad to get to hear all about it from her. Amanda is a writer and researcher who focuses on far-right extremism. Welcome, Amanda. Thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you for having me.
First, let's talk about CPAC briefly for those who don't know what it is. What is it and who generally participates in it?
So it's the annual conservative gathering. I mean, it used to be much smaller. It wasn't as much of like a big show. I was in a smaller venue, and I don't want to say we'd have more normal people because CPAC was always a little bit of the weirdos. Like Ron Paul would go to it, but it's over time gotten more and more circus-like, I would say. Like maybe they're trying to imitate the Turning Point USA with a smaller budget. So you'll have Stephen Miller, you'll have Steve Bannon now, who was previously banned. You'll have Nazis now, all kind of hanging out in the same space. It usually is 4 days, I think it was 3 this year, of speeches. There's an exhibit hall where, there's various vendors, and that's pretty much it. It's dying, though. It used to be in the heyday of Trump. It was very exciting, and especially during COVID, it was huge because that was the only thing to do. But this year was pretty sad display.
Walk us through what happened this year at CPAC. I know that there had been some word that at the beginning, Schlapp had said no journalists or something like that. Walk us through what happened there and what your experience was.
So first, I want to say I was credentialed media in 2023, and that was not a problem. So this year I applied, and they're so disorganized. They don't send you a confirmation email when you apply for media. So I applied in like early January. As soon as you could, I applied for press credentials. And then like 4 weeks later, I was like, maybe I forgot to apply. So I'm going to do it again. But then I realized I had definitely done it twice. So that's important in a minute. A week before CPAC, I get an email. You're approved. No problems. They start sending me the press emails over the next few days. And the Monday before CPAC, I get another email and it says, you're rejected. And I thought, because I'm an idiot, I was like, maybe this is because I applied twice and they just have 2 different files for it. So I showed up Wednesday for a press check-in, and they were like, no, you're revoked. But just hours before I had gotten there, Matt Schlapp had gone on Steve Bannon's show and said, we're going to deny or take away press credentials from the left-wing propagandists, and if you want to come to the event, you can buy a ticket like everyone else. So I asked the women working, can I buy a ticket? And they said, oh yeah. And I said, will I get kicked out? And they were like, that's never happened. So no, you won't get kicked out. I bought a ticket. The next day, first day of CPAC, I go. And within hours, a security guard named Tim is taking the badge off my neck and saying, I have to leave the premises. And he said I could stay at the hotel, the lobby, I could stay in the restaurants, anywhere I wanted, but I could not come back to CPAC.
What rationale was given? You had paid for it.
I was on a red flag list, and I was never to be admitted at all. And it was an error I was ever allowed in the door.
Did this happen to other journalists that you're aware of?
No, it didn't. In fact, Mother Jones, in the middle of CPAC, wrote an article about how they had bought a ticket. Some outlets just chose to not attend. They just didn't go. But of the ones that bought tickets, there was another reporter for a different, far more left outlet that did not get kicked out, standing next to me watching me get kicked out.
I wanted to hear from you what happened after that. So you decided not to leave. What did you end up observing, experiencing in your time kicked out of CPAC, in the lobby, in the bar area, wherever else you were allowed to be?
Anywhere you go during CPAC is full of CPACians. Most of the time I stayed right in the hotel lobby. And as soon as I got kicked out, I'm sitting there and I tweeted about it. And I, of course, had to tell my editor, I think the direction for the story has changed because I will not be talking about the panels. A Nazi that I know walked by and he was like, hey, heard you got kicked out. Man, if I get kicked out, I'll come hang out with you here and we can start a coalition, an anti-CPAC coalition. And I was like, Ryan, you're not getting kicked out. You're going to be allowed in. And he was like, yeah, I know. And he was. The Nazi got to walk right on in. That was how this opened up for me.
And can you tell listeners a little bit more about what you mean there were Nazis at CPAC?
So Ryan Sanchez, we'll start with him. He's the one who offered to form this coalition with me. So he used to be a member of Identity Europa, which you might remember from Unite the Right. And he was also a member of RAM, the racist street fighting gang. He was kicked out of the Marine Corps for being too much of a white nationalist. And this is extremely well known, extremely documented. Ryan has a channel on Cozy, which is Nick Fuentes' streaming service. He's friends with Nick Fuentes, streams on his service. That's what we're talking about here. And he's allowed into CPAC. In fact, last year at CPAC, Ryan and some of his friends surrounded me and called me a slut for 6 minutes on a live stream. This year, they were a little bit more low-key in their harassment than the slut circle. Another one of Ryan's friends, his name is Kolton. He actually just got kicked out of the Young Republican Club for being a Nazi. He was happy to show me the backgrounds on his phone were swastikas and other Hitler imagery. He asked me to recite the 14 words. I'm not a Groiper. I'm not a Nick Fuentes acolyte. I'm more extreme than that. And he also had a ticket to CPAC and was also allowed inside CPAC. No problems.
In the video that you posted, I believe that there's at least 4 men in this video, and they are basically taunting you. I don't know another way to describe that, by sig-heiling around you. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
So in the video, Ryan's the one saluting. Kolton is the one taking the photo. And those are the 2 that have CPAC access. There were 2 other men. One is Greg Conte, who was Richard Spencer's bodyguard at Unite the Right. I feel like that says enough about him right there. And then the other was somebody else who was involved in the MPI, circles in National Justice Party. I think his last name, or I think the last name he goes by is Vandal. They did not have tickets to CPAC, but they were in the physical hotel. And also, to be clear, when Nick Fuentes was kicked out of CPAC last year, I watched it happen. He had to leave the room he had at the hotel. He was removed off the premises. So I don't know what the difference is there, but I know they could have done something after the sig-heil. It's a lot of discussion. 14 words this. Why don't I have any white babies? That. Hitler. That kind of stuff. The normal things you talk about with Nazis. And that was when Ryan was like, we should take a picture. And I was like, we should not take a picture. So I just got to have my head down and my middle finger up because you don't want to be in a photo with a Nazi. And so I did not know that he had done the salute at the time, because when he posted the photo, that's not what he was doing in the photo. Their group had people coming and going, but those were the 4 core ones that were standing there.
When this became known, what was the reaction at CPAC? They weren't removed. Do you know their level of participation in the conference, the degree to other people were interacting with them? What response CPAC made towards having overt Nazis at the conference?
So the guy who took the video posted it Saturday night, and the conference ended Saturday, posted it around 10:30 p.m. I was tagged in it, and I sent it to a few people that I had talked to throughout CPAC. One of them is the NBC journalist who posted it everywhere without any context or my name. And so CPAC was done at this point, which is probably why he waited to post it. Until then, Matt Schlapp primarily was ignoring me. Before I published my article, I sent a detailed, list of questions. I think it was about 40, including things like, because he says there were no Nazis at CPAC. And I said, well, do you consider Sieg Heiling to be an expression of neo-Nazi beliefs? Like things like that. He never got back to me. Nobody at AC ever got back to me. Eventually, after the article I wrote was out, Matt Schlapp subtweeted me instead of addressing me. Very cowardly. So I quote tweeted him and I said, why are you afraid to talk to me, Matt? And I asked him again about all the Nazis. And he said, I love Israel. So that's where Matt is. He loves Israel and the Bible, and there were no Nazis.
And that was the only response from.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, there's a video of it.
I wanted to get your take on how you would describe the relationship between these explicit neo-Nazis and the more mainstream fascists running the show and ostensibly filling the seats at CPAC.
I have written a lot about groypers or generic Hitler fans within young Republican clubs or within state GOPs. And this was fascinating because some of my young Republicans I write about were at this event. I don't know what happens inside CPAC, and I honestly can't speak to people who were over 50. I have no idea. Obviously, I was removed right away, and even if I hadn't been, I really wouldn't know much about the average person who's going to be there. But what I do know is that I watched as the members of the young Republican clubs that I write about that are known to be more extreme. New York, DC, a lot of the ones in Texas, they're there and they're going to parties with Ryan Sanchez, who again was kicked out of the Marines for being too much of a racist. In terms of what I cover, all of those things that are supposed to be mainstream were absolutely converging with the Nazis. I mean, it was just happening everywhere. Every time I saw these people, they were all getting to know one another, I guess.
Do you have any thoughts on why it is that overt Nazis mingling at CPAC has not been really a major story that keeps getting not just hammered at, but further exposed?
I can tell you when I pitch stories to editors, not about this, but I say, hey, this guy in the GOP, he's friends with Nick Fuentes. He's a Nazi and he's getting billionaire money. Yes, everybody knows there's Nazis in the GOP. No one cares. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people don't understand that. So I don't know. You have to ask an editor, not me. My personal opinion, and I'm obviously biased as I'm in it, but I think it's a powerful video if you especially understand the context, because the implicit endorsement is that Schlapp and CPAC and ACU are okay with literal neo-Nazis not only being at their event, but harassing the journalists who would cover them. And honestly, covering it and not saying that it's a journalist they're harassing, that's running cover for Nazis too, as far as I think. So I have no idea. I wish I knew, because then I'd be able to sell my fucking stories, but I don't know.
I really appreciate that and the context that you are providing on exactly why this should be a bigger story and more covered. As we close out our chat, I think right now people are totally missing, not paying attention to, or getting all wrong that you want to either clarify or get people to start paying attention to.
Well, I've got some stuff coming out about this, actually, about Texas and the border and like what Abbott is doing at Eagle Pass. And I think that everybody knew about the convoy. And it was a joke. Like, I went with the convoy. It was a joke. It was awful. What is happening in Eagle Pass, Texas is got a long-term plan of the fringe far right in the Texas GOP. And they have been slowly taking over the Republican Party of Texas. I think it's going to be something. I think what is happening at Eagle Pass, what Abbott is doing, he's not just doing it for fun. I think it's more serious than that. And I think that this coalition of states that are trying to buck the federal government in an election year is probably something we should all be keeping an eye on, especially considering the kinds of people that have been pushing for this very conflict between the state of Texas and the federal government at Eagle Pass. It's been a long time coming.
Thanks so much for that reminder. And it's something that we're going to keep talking about on the show for sure. And I want to thank you, Amanda, for talking with me, for